You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. This is Force 13 Live, latest update on Hurricane Dorian, which is still a 185 mile per hour Category 5 storm on the Saffir-Simpson scale. National Hurricane Center's 10 p.m. update statement. They're doing hourly updates. Catastrophic Category 5 Dorian beginning to cross eastern Grand Bahama. I can tell you the center of the storm's eye is just 5 miles offshore now, and will probably make a full landfall on Grand Bahama in a few hours. This is a life-threatening situation. Residents in the Abacos should continue to stay in their shelter as the northern eye wall of Dorian remains over the northern portion of the island. Residents in eastern Grand Bahama are experiencing the western portion of the eye wall. Do not leave your shelter as the eye passes over, as winds will rapidly increase on the other side of the eye. Conditions will continue to deteriorate over the remainder of the Grand Bahama Island tonight. We could still see wind gusts of over 220 miles per hour from this storm right now, with sustained winds of 185 miles per hour. Along with that, you could see a storm surge of 18 to 23 feet above normal tide levels with higher destructive waves. These hazards will cause extreme destruction in the affected areas and will continue for several hours. The pressure of the storm has gone up slightly, so not quite as intense, but the wind speed remains the same. Perhaps we might see some lowering of that intensity soon. There is a bit of a weakness in the northwestern eye wall right now. You can see on the imagery, it is just starting to wane a little bit. 1 or 2 gaps starting to appear, but it is still very good value for Category 5 status. Let's now introduce the team. My name is Nathan Foy. I'm joined by David, Orlando, Strat, Euxinator, and Nelson for this hour of discussion. And we are now looking at Nelson's screen showing radar of the storm from, I assume that'll be from the Miami radar?
That is from the Miami radar. It's about 142 miles from the center of the eye of Hurricane Dorian. As you can see, some of those outer bands are just beginning to clip the coast. Earlier on in the radar images, you can see some that were over the land. But for right now, there isn't much precipitation associated with Dorian over the Florida Peninsula. The same cannot be said for the islands of the Bahamas, however.
No, and the threat to Florida is still a big issue. Whether that is actually, whether the storm is going to deliver hurricane force conditions or not is still a real toss-up right now. National Hurricane Center will come out with their new forecast cone at the top of the hour tonight. At the moment, their cone looks like this. Hurricane warning in effect for part of Florida. I'll read that out shortly. At the moment, they expect the center of the storm to pass within 52 miles of the Florida coast. Given that hurricane conditions extend outwards to 45 miles, it's cutting it extremely fine as to whether hurricane conditions will be reached or not. What's more, the storm's wind field and hurricane wind field could extend itself over these hours, as we appear to be witnessing, well, some people were talking about an eye wall replacement cycle. Is that actually happening?
We've been discussing whether or not it's going to go into an eye wall replacement cycle. Every time we use this 1-minute imagery to find any flaw. We think it's starting an eye wall replacement cycle. Maybe it's an issue just due to land interaction. I know the islands of the Bahamas are small, but they are land, and so it may cause some slight weakening there. There is an Recon aircraft about to head back for the eye right now. We'll be able to tell once it goes through whether or not it's weakening or whether or not it's just a blip on the radar or the infrared presentation.
Do we know how long that will be? That's going to be this hour, I imagine.
It is. It's hard estimating how long it'll be, but I'd say it's probably about 15-20 minutes.
All right. Feel free to chip in any of the other team members at this point. We'll take some comments and questions whilst we're here as well. We're here for the hour to discuss what's going on. You may remember last night, at this point of the evening, the National Hurricane Center didn't upgrade the storm to a Category 5 when the whole weather community pretty much thought that they should have done. We'll remain impartial on that one for now. But at the moment, this storm is much stronger than we saw it yesterday at 185 miles per hour. It might drop down to 180 miles an hour. But the thing is, and what gets me the most, is that when people start seeing that the storm is weakening, they completely, in some cases, they completely disregard the storm after that. If it weakens to 180, it is still extremely strong. If it weakens to a Category 4, it is still absolutely massive. That will happen eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, but the National Hurricane Center don't think so. They think it will remain a Category 5 until at least tomorrow night, as it moves over these islands. It's terrible. It's been 10 hours since the storm, nearly 10 hours since the storm made its first landfall, and it hasn't moved very far at all. The thing is, though, it's pretty much going according to the National Hurricane Center forecast in that in the movement, because they weren't expecting the storm to slow down the most today. They're expecting that to happen tomorrow. They're expecting the storm to be circling round at around 2 miles per hour just north of Grand Bahama as a Category 5.
It's terrifying.
Nathan, when does the next public advisory come out?
Yep, the big one coming up in the next hour.
Okay, I'm just monitoring the questions in the chat, and I just want to go back to what the current position is re the turn. The steering currents, go on.
The turn, I think, is starting. It's extremely slow, and it will take a very long time for that turn towards the north to complete. When we look at this imagery, I don't know, it's hard to tell, but from the latest estimations that we're getting on satellite, it has done just a little bit more of a turn towards the northwest, but not nearly enough to stop that general westward movement. The latest we're getting indications of right now is that it is moving at 5 miles per hour still, at a heading of 286 on the compass degrees, 270 being due west. We were looking at numbers around 280, now at 286. So if that continues to head into the 290s, 300s, the storm starts to turn a little bit further north. At the minute, still 5 miles per hour, still more west than any other direction by some distance. And for every minute that is occurring, the chances of hurricane conditions are increasing for Florida. Now, I think a good rule of thumb here is that the storm, in all likelihood, won't go any further south. So you're drawing a line from the storm's eye right now in parallel to the Florida coast. Good news, south of West Palm Beach, the storm won't make landfall there in all likelihood, although hurricane conditions are still possible there.
Yeah, it's definitely shaping up to be a very tricky situation, especially for the southeastern United States. But for the moment, when it comes to the Bahamas, this is an absolute nightmare for so many people, as we were talking about earlier today, several hours ago, about the landfall over the first landfall in the Bahamas, and the storm has barely moved, and it's still maintaining that intensity of 185 miles per hour with over 220 mile per hour wind gusts, I believe. And it hasn't changed really much, and as a result, it's turning out to be a complete nightmare.
A 19 degrees Celsius eye. But as we look at this infrared imagery again, there are two areas where cracks appear to be beginning right now. First of all, the northwest, you can see those lighter reds coming in on those late frames. So that is potentially some good news towards the west. Might be building back in those late frames though. And another potential weak spot right now as we look at it is the southeastern side. Especially in the later frames on this image, you will see a little bit more of some gaps opening up on the southeastern side. So there is some signs here that the storm is starting to lose momentum. The ATCF automated system has put the storm down to 180 miles per hour, and at the moment we're sort of wondering why the National Hurricane Center are keeping it at 185 rather than 180. Not much difference between the two. Thomas, you've been watching that with me as well. What are your thoughts?
My general thoughts are, I think that they're very similar intensities. And if the forecaster does not believe that an intensity estimate that has gone out is to be true, if they don't know what to go with, they always go with the current intensity estimate. So at least in my opinion, it's kind of a borderline case. Evidence would suggest it is certainly weakening. I would think that by the next big advisory, they would weaken it to 180. Regardless of if it's at 180 or 185, it's a serious situation at this point. It's just a very little technical thing, whether it's at 180 or 185, really. But sure. Either way, it's very dangerous.
Absolutely. There is an interesting question that's come in. I'm just going to try and spend some time figuring that one out. I'm going to have to leave that up for a little while. There's another question, I think, regarding how likely is it becoming that the storm continues west, or something along those lines. The westward model scenarios, are they coming to be more likely? I think it was something along those lines.
Well, I want to continue to see models come out to show that trend. The GFS has been shifting west through the day, so is the European from what we've seen. But I want to see that happen again at midnight, or not midnight, but the Eastern, or not Eastern even, but the next 0Z runs when they come out. I want to see another confirmation of such a move like that. The 18Z runs had a pretty decent shift towards the west compared to yesterday's at that same time. The GFS now wants a landfall at hurricane intensity, and the GFS is under initializing the strength of the storm as well. It wants a landfall in North Carolina. Other models have shifted towards the west as well. HMON brings it very close to shore. HRF brings it onshore. The official track is very close to landfall in North Carolina at this time as well. So I really want to see what the 0Z runs really render out as, and see the NHC cone update at 11 p.m. as well when we're here for that, because we're going to see if they shift it even closer to Florida, any land point. I know right now we said the closest approach right now on the cones for the NHC is 52 miles, and the current extent of hurricane force winds is 45 miles. Or not, just about. But you have to keep in mind that this wind field will probably start expanding within the next 48 hours as well. So by the time it gets to that point, even if it is 52 miles offshore, hurricane force winds could still be impacting parts of Florida at that time regardless. And any further deviation to the west could mean even more severe impacts as well. And even more of a deviation to west, even if it doesn't make landfall in Florida, could potentially mean a more confirmation of potential landfall in another southeastern state, like South Carolina or North Carolina, down the line as well. So we have to be monitoring that very closely on top of everything else that we've already been doing. And that's why we're fortunate to have reconnaissance on the storm to kind of gather some necessary data. Speaking of that, we're going to get an iPass update any second now, probably within the next couple minutes. I'm kind of confused with the 10 p.m. advisory why they stayed with 915 millibars, considering that the Recon got a 914 drop zone right before that. I'm not sure why they didn't update it to that, but I want to see what the flight level pressure is here. Initially, it was up 6 millibars from right before it made its first landfall in Abaco. But over the period of time where it's fully over water again, that flight pressure within less than an hour time frame lowered 2 millibars. So we're going to see a pass right now as it's making landfall again. And we're going to want to see if that flight pressure is different at all again. And I'm going to keep a very close eye on that page for any refreshments, new data points to come in. I'll be sure to share those immediately as soon as I get them. So if you see a sudden interruption from me, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but it's important data.
All right, let's do a little position estimate right now. As of 11 minutes past, which is 5 minutes ago, the center of the eye of Dorian was 2.5 miles off the eastern tip of Grand Bahama. That's how close it is now to making landfall there. Assuming a movement of 5 miles per hour, that means it will get there to that landfall in half an hour. Now, some people define landfalls differently. I'm quite a stickler for it, only the center of the eye. The agencies generally call it a landfall when the eye itself moves over land, and that has happened on the eastern tip of Grand Bahama. Yep. It's also 15 miles south of Crown Haven. It's 28 miles east of High Rock, which will be getting hurricane force conditions now, and from Freeport, which is quite a large town over there on the western side. Okay, it's gone down for me here. It'll be something like 60 miles.
Yeah, and I have a quick question. There's I'm not sure if it's just one map, but one of the IR maps I see, just a satellite map, shows
50 miles.
I think an isolated island off of Grand Bahama completely in the eye right now.
Not sure about that. Just to reiterate, 50 miles from Freeport. So Freeport will be getting hurricane force winds probably within an hour or two.
Yeah, so just an absolutely devastating situation that we're continuing to see unfold. It feels like, there's almost nothing you can do when you see it just approaching so slowly at this pace. And the best we can do is try to reach out to any people that may still potentially be able to hear such coverage. And tell them to be in safe positions and do not venture outside anymore at this point in time.
I'm not sure exactly what island you're referring to. I mean, there's the Keys just south of the eastern tip of Grand Bahama. August Key, Big Harbor Key, Sweetings Key, all in the storm's eye right now.
Yeah, I don't know the names of those islands in particular, but those are probably the ones that presumably are the ones that I was mentioning. But just for anyone that's in harm's way that could still somehow hear this, make sure you're in a safe location and do not leave that location during the iPass, and only leave it when you're sure the rest of the storm is finished through. Keep in mind when the eye passes, it's going to be less than halfway done because the eastern side has more to it than the western side. And update on the Recon, it's almost at the center now. We're getting Cat 5 flight level winds from the southeastern quadrant. We're about to, within the next 10 minutes, get that full eye pass and get that information out. I'll make sure to relay that as soon as we get it to get the live information updates for all the viewers.
Alright, so as soon as that information comes out, we'll let you know, and the National Hurricane Center will be updating later on. Let me just remind people of what else is going on around the world. We do have to mention it at least briefly. There are now 3 other tropical cyclones active around the world. In the Western Pacific, Tropical Depression 14 and now Tropical Depression 15 has formed. 92W has become Tropical Depression 15W. That's near the Philippines, 14W well out at sea. Juliet, a tropical storm, will become a hurricane most likely tomorrow. And in the Atlantic, look at this. 3 areas of interest as well as Dorian. The first one near the Cape Verde Islands right now, that has an 80% chance of forming in the next 5 days, 60% in the next 48 hours, depicted on the screen. The second one in the Gulf of Mexico, 40% chance in 5 days as it moves towards the coast of Mexico. And the one in the middle out at sea, 30% chance in the next 5 days. That will move in a generally northerly direction. So more systems to track. Number 1 is probably of most long-term concern. I haven't looked at models recently because we've been so busy with Dorian, but I assume it's going to move out over the ocean and possibly intensify a bit.
I believe that most of the storms out here are expected to intensify. I've produced cones and forecasts for Dorian, Juliet, 15W and 14W. I've looked into it. Juliet, 15W, and 14W are all going to intensify, and I at least forecast are going to intensify into at least Category 1s on the Saffir-Simpson scale at some point within their lifetime. So that could definitely be interesting. The most borderline case for it would be 14W at this time.
Here's a comment question. It seems everyone in Orlando has let their guard down. What and when are the effects possible in Orlando? Well, at the minute, Orlando is down as having, I think, 70-something% chance. Maybe it's not quite that high. Somewhere around the 70% mark for tropical storm conditions. You know, deviation in that track could lead to hurricane conditions for Orlando. It is unlikely at the minute that that will happen, but stranger things have happened with this storm.
Very true.
Rainfall amounts probably about... it's very close to the fine line because the storm is just off the coast of Florida. If it moves 10 miles west, you'll get an extra 2 or 3 inches of rain. So at the minute, we're looking at maybe 3 or 4 inches for the Orlando area.
Yeah, just little wobbles and little speed changes are crucial right now for where the storm's going to go. There's a lot of uncertainty. You can see on the cone that I have on my screen that I've produced, you can see it goes all the way from a
We'll get there in just a minute.
landfall in Florida to it's all good, all the way to it just going out to sea and not actually having that serious of an impact to land. Regardless, you should be ready for this, because if it does go along that center line, the eastern coast of Florida, the eastern coast of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and even the possibility of Virginia could all receive at least tropical storm force winds. If the track goes west, which is the general shifting motion, the general trend right now, you could see hurricane, if not major hurricane force winds along the coastline. So I would definitely be preparing, as this is a very dangerous situation unfolding right now.
And these cones are generated by our team and regularly posted on our social media outlets, Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, and we should also keep in mind with these that at the 11 p.m. update, if the newer model runs, the 0Z, GFS, and other ones that the NGC already has, along with their pointed move that the storm has continued pretty close to due west comparatively to what they wanted for a while now, was a start to 11 p.m. update. And that could mix everything up even more, because let's say they shift the track 10 miles west. That means they would then be predicting hurricane force winds to be onshore of Florida rather than being just off the coast.
Yeah, models.
And then everything we have to do from there is complete mincemeat, because that means that tropical storm force winds would be mostly assured that they keep that trend along the Georgia to North Carolina coast. Then we'd have to be monitoring further down the line how close this stays to the coast to see what kind of potential impacts could even happen to the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. So we're like, oh, well, this isn't making landfall. It's not as big of a deal. Well, you can't rule landfall out yet because it's within the cone of uncertainty, one. And two, it's always important to reiterate that the effects from the storm extend far from the eye, especially as this starts to move north and expands in size.
Models haven't changed very much at the latest update at midnight UTC. These update every 6 hours, by the way. A few slight changes, though. I think the general consensus is very slightly west, but still, most of the models have the storm at an arm's length away from the Florida coast, about 50 miles, which is right on the edge of hurricane force winds for the coast. What is different, though, now, after the 2 or 3 days, is that more models are now getting on board with the storm clipping, and that is to say a landfall somewhere along the coast of North Carolina before exiting towards the Atlantic.
Interesting.
And in terms of potential wind field size that we watched at that point, Isaac posted something very interesting. It looks like on radar imagery there may be double eye walls starting to form up. And
we're wondering whether the double eye walls have been there the whole time. We'd say
that's true. You've been wondering that for a long time
and again.
But if this actually really happens and the inner eye wall actually goes down, that will expand the wind field significantly.
It's been like that with those concentric eye walls for the last, from what I remember, last 2 or 3 hours or so, and it's just been like that. They haven't done anything except to stay there, so it's been having concentric eye walls for a long time.
Yeah,
whether there's an eye wall placement cycle remains to be seen with it. It's really kind of just, I guess, waiting. I don't know. It's just not doing an eye wall placement cycle at this time.
And I think it's needed to just point out, as if an eye wall replacement cycle occurs and these hurricane force winds
we've got some breaking news from the Western Pacific. Tropical storm Ling Ling has been named by the Japanese Meteorological Agency at this time. With wind speeds of 40 miles per hour and a pressure of 1,000 millibars. That's the storm next to the Philippines that was tagged 15W by 14W, is it? What are we up to? Whichever one was tagged the latest by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center has been named Ling Ling.
We also have more breaking news. The Recon flight just went through the eye of Dorian and they found a pressure down to 911.9 millibars. And flight level wind, actually, with disregard to flight level wind, it's actually invalid at this point because it's over land.
Okay. So things are happening very quickly across the whole globe right now, but the main feature is still Dorian. Strat? Oh, well, Strat was about to say something. And
I'm just looking at some of the Recon data.
Just start
the
again?
Raw data file.
I don't think we're having some...
Yeah, sorry, my reception might be splotchy at this point in time. Bad college reception. Looks like we're still getting flight level winds of above 150 knots. The SFMR and MLSP or MSLP were kind of cutting out in that pass from Recon, which is frustrating to say the least. But that was a southeast to northwest pass, and we're still getting consistent Cat 5 readings. Just based on what we could be seeing, I might be more comfortable with potentially saying 180 miles an hour, but that's still an extremely powerful storm. The Recon shows Category 5 sustained winds over parts of Grand Bahama right now as we speak as well. And that pressure may be starting to rise just a tiny bit again due to land interaction as well. I think it's a smidge higher, still in the same number, but in terms of decimal points, a smidge higher than the last eye pass.
So again, we're looking at the latest satellite imagery of the storm. Anyone want to comment more about the potential that the satellite presentation is showing weaknesses northwestern side and southeastern side?
It's an intriguing feature to say the least. I can see it, especially very clearly on RAM imagery. It looks like cloud tops are cooling really around the entirety of the storm if you pay close attention, but mostly on the northwestern and southeastern sides. although I think the entirety of the storm is beginning to wane a little bit. In cloud tops, this could be for a few reasons. Number one, land interaction, raising the pressure gradually. Gradual weakening could be occurring, but also because it's kind of nightfall. We're losing diurnal heating. We're losing some energy to initiate convection. So convection may not be as strong overnight, and new convection may not be able to initiate. And I don't think those sea surface temperatures are quite warm enough, especially with how slow it's moving, to sustain such strong convection with such a strong storm, especially without that energy from the daytime.
Well, also it could be trying to show some slight rumblings of it, maybe actually trying to go through with the elevation cycle. And another thing to keep a note is that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just what I'm seeing midway through this loop is there seems to be something strange going on in the northern side of the eye wall, where there just appears to be some. It's not flowing in the same way. There appears to be an area of disruption going on up there. There it is, going
Maybe
by.
it's the secondary eye wall trying to form.
It may well be.
But like I was saying, it's also, if it gets far west enough, it could encounter the Gulf Stream and get into even warmer, deeper waters, which will not be good at all. So that could maintain its strength at least. But it just depends if it decides to go under that elevation cycle or not, and where it exactly decides to head up. If it goes more west or it goes north from now on.
I think also the eye is losing its shape just a little bit.
Possibly. Just at the same time, though, within the past 72 hours, we've seen multiple kind of eye wobbles, and it looks like, oh, is it going to lose its shape and start to fall apart, and it's just snapped right back to where it's a perfect round shape again. So, I really hope we see a more sustained trend of that start to occur. I'm just not very optimistic about it yet at this point in time, just because of what we've seen in the past several days of it potentially starting to wobble and change shape and look less uniform, and then almost immediately after see it immediately change back to prime performance.
Yes, and in the latest imagery, as of just a few moments ago, the eye of the storm is now within 1 mile of the center of the eye, making landfall on Grand Bahama. So that's pretty much happening now. The center of the eye moving through Grand Bahama as a landfall. And that is, again, at least a 180 mile an hour landfall there. This is absolutely crazy still that we're thinking about this, and it's made multiple landfalls at that intensity, 180, 185. I can't see the National Hurricane Center staying with 185 at the update. They'll probably down it by 5 miles per hour. Doesn't mean very much in the grand scheme of things. This thing will probably stay a Category 5 for up to another 24 hours yet. The worst part is that it's moving 5 miles an hour, and if you think that's slow as you watch it trundle along on the screen, it could halve in its speed tomorrow. But I do really think those later frames, the eye is becoming a lot wider whilst not becoming longer. It's expanding on one plane only, which would appear to me that there is something going on there. Maybe an eye wall replacement cycle on the way.
You know what the strangest thing about that is? The H-Horse been predicting it would start doing that for days. That it would, that the eye would start to elongate itself in one direction but not the other. And by the time it gets to Florida, it's this elongated mess. Still strong, but very elongated. I don't know why exactly it thinks that. I think a part of it could be because of the competing steering currents right now. The ridge is attempting to still keep this thing going westward. The trough is starting to get its tug, and they're going in almost exact opposite directions. So it could be more of it's starting to compress the eye a little bit one way, and in response, that outer eye wall has kind of formed, and we're starting to see that expansion of the eye in one particular direction.
Yeah, it just seems to be getting ever so slightly sloppy, but still, for the moment, we're really just thinking about, is this a sign of things that will probably happen tomorrow? For the time being tonight, this remains an extremely dangerous 180 or 185 mile an hour Category 5 hurricane, and it's not going to weaken very much. From what we've been seeing on the models, weakening will be very slow to occur, won't it?
It'll be very gradual, yeah.
And
Yeah, it will be sad.
The hardest thing to do as well. And when we look at it last night, they were saying, "Oh, peaked then, it's going to weaken from here." They're saying earlier this morning that it already peaked and it's going to weaken from there, and it still got to 185 miles an hour. I mean, I think just with what we're looking at right now, in terms of the storm and where it's headed, the forecast intensities now, along with the land interaction possible, and just its structure and potential eyewall replacement cycle that's potentially occurring. Isaac has the great radar imagery, the double eyewalls. We could potentially start to finally see a very slow weakening trend come into play, and hopefully that happens quicker than we expect. But it just doesn't look very much so at the moment that we'll get that lucky. And if an eyewall replacement cycle does actually come through in lower wind speeds, then we're stuck with a situation where where it could potentially re-intensify after it's done, after it's crossed Grand Bahama if conditions are appropriate for it, and where the wind field is significantly larger at that point in time as well. And that doesn't even include the expansion size the storm could have when it starts to go poleward as well.
If it re-intensifies after it gets a larger wind field, the damage it will do not just to the Bahamas but to the United States, it's catastrophic. Even maybe being here in Tampa, you might get some damage.
Well, one also must keep in mind. Oh, go ahead, Nelson.
I'm sorry. I'm going to ask Nathan to bring up my screen share. Isaac, you say what you need, and then have him throw it to me.
Alright, I was just going to say, you must also keep in mind, even if this thing, say, 12 hours from now weakens to 160, 160 is still nothing to mess around with. Just look at footage of Hurricane Michael from Mexico Beach. That was 160 at landfall. So you're still going to see winds of that magnitude. So whether or not it stays at 185 or goes down to 180 or goes down to 160, it's still going to be a formidable system and powerful system that nobody should take lightly at all, with any shadow of doubt. But go ahead, Nelson.
Well, if my screen share is showing, what you can see is the infrared imagery of Hurricane Dorian. This is from 2035 UTC. That is 6 hours ago. And as you see this gray line here, what I've done is I've mapped what I believe to be the center point of Irma. I don't know why I did that. I'm so sorry. Dorian.
All right, save that one.
Terrible. 6 hours ago, and then I've advanced it 6 hours to the center point, and what you get is this line right here. It's about 54.5 kilometers long, which is the distance traveled, but what you can see is that this is very near, just a few degrees north of due west to this point. I know we've seen wobbles in it at times, but really when you average it out over the 6 hours, that is nearly due west. I don't know when this turn is going to happen. We talked about maybe we were seeing it in some of the 1-minute imagery, but again, those wobbles in such short time periods can start to play with your mind, because the fact of the matter is, the graphical interpretation shows it's just a degree or two north of due west.
And that's rather damning.
Yes, it is.
Because the models and the NHC at this point already wanted it to be starting to shift much more significantly to the west-northwest than it actually has. And like we've mentioned multiple times through the stream today, at the earlier in the day chat, when it first got to its 175 to 185 mile, we were kind of baffled at that. 3-hour discussion earlier in the evening to now, we've seen mentioned again and again that every minute, every hour that it continues to go closer to this due west attitude that wasn't previously anticipated, really, the more and more likely that the Florida and parts of the East Coast see more severe impacts. And we need to continue to monitor that development because we need to take it very seriously to watch very closely how quickly this thing slows down more, how much it slows down, what direction it starts to turn in, and when. All of this is imperative to future work at the moment. And I'm just looking at the 1 minute imagery. Do we have, I mean, according to us with the center of the eye, do we have landfall at this point in time?
Over Grand Bahama, I think so, yes.
Because the very last frames looks like more than half the eye is there, and it looks like we finally have a landfall. And the first half of those Category 5 sustained winds are through the very eastern port of Grand Bahama. And at this rate, Freeport is going to get the worst of it as well. I wouldn't be surprised
God.
if nothing significant happens, if Category 5 sustained winds end up impacting that area as well, as devastating as that seems.
The scary thing is, though, is that there's a weather station on a far western part of Freeport towards the edge of the island, and the scary thing is that station is only reporting low-end tropical storm force winds right now currently, and that eye wall is right on shore on the eastern side of the island, so that's pretty scary there. One side are getting hectic winds, the other side are getting barely tropical storm force winds.
Wow.
It shows just how small this is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, compared to other systems that we've seen, compared to like just Irma, for example, it's significantly smaller. But Irma went through many more eyewall replacement cycles before it even reached its peak intensity. And we got to keep in mind that smaller in size doesn't mean any less destructive. This is a stage 10 on the CDPS scale. That's the highest you can possibly get, well within the top 5% of all landfalling storms. And just to add on to that further, it's I can't really stress enough the fact that this has become today the strongest storm in in recorded history in the Atlantic Basin that has been outside of the Caribbean Sea of the Gulf of Mexico. This surpassed Irma today, both in pressure and in wind speed. Irma was lowered down to 180 miles an hour afterwards and had a pressure in the 910s. This one got to 910, and you could argue potentially intermediately it got a little bit below that, and reached confirmed 185 mile an hour sustained winds. So you cannot overstate at all how mind-boggling this system is, and what it continues to be. Now it's been a Category 5 system for over 24 hours, according to Force 13. We declared it a Category 5 system at 10 p.m. Eastern. Yesterday, August 31st, it is 10:42 p.m. Eastern. On September 1st, it's been over 24 hours, close to 25 hours of this thing being an extremely dangerous Category 5 storm.
We've had so many questions over the last few minutes, it's impossible to go through them. So I'll point out a few things here. This is the last National Hurricane Center track. They'll be doing a new one very soon. Don't forget that the center of the storm could still pass anywhere within that cone. It's what we've always said. It's what still remains the case. The eye of Hurricane Dorian could still make landfall anywhere from West Palm Beach all the way up to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. That is probably the biggest point to take away with you as we enter the late hours of today. The problem is we still won't know whether the storm will make landfall in Florida, or even if Florida will get hurricane force winds, probably until late Monday, depending on what exactly we'll have seen from the storm by then in terms of its movement. The next 24 hours is going to be crucial as to whether Florida and how much of Florida gets tropical storm, hurricane force winds in the long run.
I also want to put this, as you said before, the re-intensification of, well, not re the eye wall replacement. If it re-intensifies, which is probably like a 1% chance or something like that, then basically it's, well, I don't know when it's gonna weaken. If that happens.
Weakening will be very slow to occur. Wind shear is in the 10 to 15 knot range. The one thing that will probably weaken the storm the most in the next 24 hours is if it presses the self-destruct button and completely stalls, doesn't move at all. Water, sea surface temperature upwelling might start to begin. The storm might begin to capitulate. But really, you cannot say that this will go below, say, Category 3 by the time it makes its closest pass to Florida.
I think it'll still be Category 5 by the time
it could well
gets
be.
to its closest.
Yeah.
And it could make landfall, honestly.
It could be a
really
Category 4,
think...
Category 3, possibly Category 5.
I really don't think it could make landfall in Florida as a Category 5.
Yeah, I doubt that as well. But a landfall in Florida can't be ruled out either because it is within the cone of uncertainty, which is one standard deviation either direction, and that means 33% of the time the storm can also go outside of that cone. And considering the things with the models so far and some of the uncertainty with the stalling motion, when it's going to happen, where will it happen, a landfall is still a possibility in Florida, but it's not as likely as we were assuming 3 days ago, where we were saying over 50% chances, under 50% chance now.
Yeah.
You can't rule it out either. It's within the cone of uncertainty for a reason.
Absolutely disastrous.
And you're completely right that the only thing that could stop the storm potentially would be it hitting the self-destruct button on itself. And if that were to happen, regardless, that would still expand the wind field significantly and potentially increase the area of impacts even more. So you could say, oh, that's a good thing, but is it a bad thing at the same time for certain areas as well?
All right. We sort of said it earlier, but I'd just like to confirm that the storm has made landfall. The center of the eye has made landfall on August Key in the Bahamas, just off Grand Bahama. Ironic that it's now September and August Key has had the landfall just a little bit late. The National Hurricane Center expected to update very shortly as we bring back the radar screen from Nelson there just for a few moments. They should be updating any time. I did interrupt someone there inadvertently. If you'd like to go ahead.
All right. So I'm gonna be honest. As you said that the only way you can stop is from stalling. Now I don't know if this is gonna happen or not, but I am predicting that it will not stall. I don't think it will.
No, I don't think it will. But if it did, there would be a big problem for the storm.
Yeah.
And I don't think it will stall. I think it will move, keep moving, maybe drop to about 3 miles per hour during the course of tomorrow, which is just about still fast enough to avoid any upwelling that would weaken the storm.
Yeah,
I think it'll be
and unfortunately, I'm not really expecting at this point in time, although I could be wrong. In the end, I wouldn't be surprised at this point if the center of the eye, crosses over most of the longitude or the horizontal axis of Grand Bahama at this point in time, just because we aren't seeing that northward motion nearly as harshly or as quickly as we'd like to see. Who knows, overnight I may be proven wrong. I sincerely hope I am, because Freeport's closer to the western side, and if it could somehow avoid the most extremities of the eye wall, that would be spectacular. But just with the current trends, we need to see a stronger slowdown than what we've seen. It's still going 5 miles an hour. Briefly, the interpolated ATCF was saying 6 miles an hour, but it went back down to 5, fortunately. We were getting pretty worried about that for a second. But 5 miles an hour right now, and seemingly not slowing down enough anymore, and not turning the right direction yet either. We could see the eye cross through all of this area, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a very, very scary situation. I'm personally predicting a near due west movement for the next 12 to 24 hours before the turn finally starts to take place. It's just due to the westward shift the models have been taking. And I just think that ridge is stronger than the models keep initializing it at. I think it's been stronger. Recon has proven it's been stronger every time it's gone than the models thought it would be by that point. The trough today did produce some severe weather in the United States. Not quite as much as expected, indicating it's not quite as strong as we thought either. So it's It's really a can of worms that's being opened right now with this trough, and perhaps its timing and its strength are not exactly what we thought it was initially.
Yeah, this is not really cut and dry track-wise storm here like, say, Michael was. Michael's track was pretty cut and dry. This one's not really set in stone just yet. And like people were saying earlier in here, pretty much the only thing that could weaken the storm at this point in time is either it stalling and uprolling cooler sea surface temperatures from below, or maybe it having some internal issues and capitulating in that way too. Are pretty much the only two ways I see it weakening from here on in. I don't know if you guys disagree or agree, but that's what I think.
Is there anything that we can ascertain from this radar screen right now? First of all, whether there are two eye walls, and whether there might be an eye wall replacement cycle. That might help us a bit. And then whether there are weaknesses developing. What do we think?
Well, go on.
You can see that there's a double eye wall structure there by the looks of it. I wouldn't necessarily know where the weakness is at because it's still kind of far out from the radar view there, so it could be the eastern side, could be the southern side, I don't know yet. It's kind of too early to say that for me personally, but I don't know whether it's going to do that eye wall replacement cycle or not, but I'm going to let other people talk because I know other people wanted to talk, so go ahead, guys.
Thomas?
So I personally think that we can't draw as many conclusions from this as we will be able to once this gets closer. I don't think it's quite close enough to determine whether there are two eye walls. I think it's more likely than not there's a secondary eye wall attempting to form. And you can kind of see these drier slots in between the two areas. And I think this might be what's being indicated on satellite as those fractures, if you will, within the structure. You can see in particular on the northwestern and southeastern sides, ironically enough, that it's a little bit of a drier spot. Yeah, it's a little bit of a weaker spot within those dry slots. So satellite and radar are kind of going hand in hand here with what exactly is going on. And I think it's just a secondary eye walls forming, choking off the first one's energy. And that's the one that's been driving the convection. And I think the convection's going to wane a bit as this secondary eye wall begins to form, wrap around, and choke off the previous one. It would make the storm quite a bit larger, unfortunately. But I could be wrong. These are exceptionally difficult to predict. So nothing is set in stone at this point with this storm. I think most of us know that by now, especially looking at what it is now and what we would have said it would be 24 hours ago.
The National Hurricane Center is set to update at any time in the next 8 minutes. They'll probably run it very late because they've been doing hourly updates. They're working extremely hard, just as we are here. Any news on Recon flights at this time?
I'll take a quick look.
Okay.
Nothing new in terms of it. It's just heading towards the northwestern periphery. It's doing a turn now towards the south. So within an hour, we're going to get a southwest to northeast eyewall pass. The drop zone into the system got 916 millibars again. So we're at the same thing that we were at the initial eye pass. So we're back up 2 millibars from that low at 914. They'll probably go with 916 millibars, 180 miles an hour at the advisory, just based on the data that we're seeing. And we'll get a next eye pass within the next hour or so. The plane's going not too far out from the periphery. It didn't go all the way out this time. It's trying to get more data.
Still an eye temperature of 19 degrees Celsius inside the storm's eye at this time. An eye which is making landfall. Has made landfall over Grand Bahama in the last few minutes. And I was just looking at an image that was actually out of date, so I'm just going to get another satellite reading. 19 degrees again, the eye temperature, quite easily. So this is interesting and still moving due west at least. Yeah, exactly due west in the last half hour.
which is
Wow.
terrible news, not just for the United States, where we're monitoring that for large population centers, but for Grand Bahama itself, because if it continues that track, that means the whole island, from here on the eastern end all the way to Freeport, will go directly through the eye if that trend were to extrapolate and continue.
And the cane changes.
That too, definitely.
Something that I've noticed is that there is a good bit of convection now from Dorian beginning to go ashore onto Florida. You can see that southward convection on Nelson's radar. It's not an outer band, really, but it is some pop-up thunderstorms as a result of Dorian. Really headed due southward, some just off the coast and some now coming ashore. So Dorian is beginning to influence Florida's environment.
Well, there was a severe thunderstorm warning at Naples earlier.
And a tornado warning earlier.
Was there a tornado
Further
warning?
south.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, further south.
Yeah, and just to reiterate the severity of the situation, Nathan, I'm going to want you to answer this. Someone asked, how often do we see a storm reach stage 10 on the CDPS scale?
In the Atlantic, I think there's only been 4 since 1988. So that tells you something.
To put that in perspective, that would average once a decade.
This would be number
About.
4. Yeah.
So
With the other
a
three
sobering
being-
thought to see how powerful these systems are.
Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Wilma, and I can't remember what Devon listed as the other one.
Maybe Gilbert or Mitch?
Gilbert?
It might have been Gilbert, perhaps.
It was Gilbert.
Yeah, but it just shows the rarity of a storm to be this intense. And, what Devin was making a point that the size of the storm was giving only 10 points or something like that, was what he was saying. But the strength of the storm and the rainfalls put it all the way up there. And that doesn't even, and it just
New update.
just how terrifying this is.
Updates out strat. 155 knots, gust to 190 knots, pressure 914 millibars. Eye diameter 10 nautical miles.
That's the 11 p.m. update on the NHC.
Yeah. New update just came out.
That is intriguing that
expect
they
to
went with the
confirm that
pressure at
shortly.
9. Just waiting for. I'm sure everyone is
I posted
probably
in the chat.
refreshing this page really quickly. The web traffic is probably insane on the site. That's
posted.
interesting. They went with 914 millibars. If they got 916 right there,
A Hurricane Watch has
I guess
been
that's just because they were finishing it.
extended. Strat. A Hurricane Watch has been extended northward from Flagler-Volusia County line to the mouth of the St. Mary's River. A Storm Surge Watch has also been extended northward from Flagler-Volusia County line to the same place, mouth of the St. Mary's River, along with the warnings that are already in effect. They're going with 180 mile per hour winds, a pressure of 914. They expect that the storm will lose Category 5 intensity tomorrow afternoon. And it will remain a Category 4 until sometime on Wednesday. I'm not sure exactly how those points show up on the map, but we'll find out what the forecast map looks like very soon.
Yeah, everyone's very eager to see that and see if there's been any adjustments made at this point in time. Any change to the west or the east, north or south, will have major ramifications for all of the United States at this point in time. And yet, the NHC upped the movement speed to 6 miles an hour, actually from 5 miles an hour. That's something very important. The movement speed has actually managed to increase from 5 miles an hour to 6 miles an hour. Which is terrible news to hear.
That's bad.
Because it means that the storm will continue to go even further west than the models have shown, and that slowdown is happening at an even slower pace.
That means hurricane force
than
winds could, in
anticipated.
fact, the west coast of Florida too, if it continues to increase.
I mean, I don't know about that. That's still Western Florida is well outside the cone of uncertainty at this point in time. But standard deviations show that
Tropical storm force winds.
statistically there is a
possible.
third chance of that happening. Yeah, I'm just waiting for the track to come out at this point in time. I'm sure everyone's probably spamming refresh on that page too to see that come out. I'm curious to see if the forecast discussion's out as well.
Well, you don't have to lift a finger. We'll show you shortly.
Let's see. So they lowered the intensity by 5 miles an hour, 5 knots, just on that. But they did increase the radii of tropical storm force winds compared to earlier today. They're still saying the ridge is there, but it's gradually weakening and shifting eastward to the trough that's coming in. The language has changed in terms of what they're saying with stalling. They said that this change in the steering pattern should cause Dorian to slow down even more and perhaps stall, rather than more than anticipating it to happen. Yeah, I'm going over the discussion right now.
It came out and they're forecasting it to weaken to 165 12 hours from now, and 24 hours from that weaken to 155, if anybody was wondering.
Whilst we wait for the map, let's read that out. Dorian remains an incredibly powerful hurricane and is currently making landfall on the eastern end of Grand Bahama Island. Satellite images show a symmetrical cyclone with a circular 10 nautical mile diameter eye and intense eye wall convection with lots of lightning being detected. Doppler radar data from Miami and the Bahamas show that Dorian has developed concentric eye walls. They've just confirmed it then. And this feature is also noted by a double wind maximum that is evident in data from the Air Force Hurricane Hunters. The initial intensity is set at 155 knots, that's 180 miles per hour. The aircraft data indicated that the radii of tropical storm force winds are a little larger than they were earlier today. Still moving slowly westward at 6 miles per hour. The ridge is gradually weakening and shifting eastward in response to a mid to upper level trough that is moving across the eastern US. This change in the steering pattern should cause Dorian to slow down even more and perhaps stall before it turns to the northwest late Monday or early Tuesday. This expected slow motion will likely be devastating to the Great Abaco and Great Bahama Islands, since it would prolong the catastrophic winds, storm surge and rainfall over those areas. The timing of the northwest or north turn is very critical in determining how close Dorian will get to the Florida Peninsula on Tuesday and Wednesday. In general, the track models have changed little from the previous cycle, so the cone is going to be very similar by the looks of things. Category 5 hurricanes like Dorian usually don't hold that intensity for very long, and it is expected that Dorian will weaken slowly during the next few days. However, the observed eye wall replacement cycle will likely cause fluctuations in strength both up and down while the system is near Florida. The models show an increase in shear when Dorian tracks near Georgia and the Carolinas, which should cause more notable weakening.
Sounds about right.
Issued that Hurricane Watch. Extended it. We do have the new forecast cone in just a tick here. Hopefully we'll get that onto the screen, and that will be pretty much the last thing we do here tonight before we finish up. We will keep running the graphics, the satellite imagery of the storm as you can see it on the screen here. We'll run that all the way through the night. There is the latest forecast graphic from the NHC.
Could we try to see what the closest point is to shore on the NHG chart there as well? Just to see if anything different happened. It looks like it's almost the exact same.
I do think it's slightly closer.
Yeah, I think it's closer.
Maybe ever so slightly. If you could try to measure that point, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Enough to give hurricane force winds is all I can tell you from that. And all I need to tell you. I'm not going to be looking up the map. I can tell you that is enough to deliver hurricane force winds to Florida, yeah.
That's very close to Cocoa Beach.
Yeah, maybe 50 miles or less at that point if it got ever so slightly closer. Just a very bad situation all around.
Well,
I am looking at, I'm not sure how reliable it is, but I'm looking at Miami Doppler radar for wind speeds now, and at least at the upper levels of things in Dorian, easily Category 5 winds are being found, especially in the northwestern quadrant. I am seeing 2 maxes in wind speed with the 2 eye walls. So one of them is at about 170, and the other one is at about 150. So both of them very powerful eye walls. and it looks like the transition of power is occurring right now from the small eye wall to the larger eye wall. And it looks like the larger eye wall is already ramping up to the intensity of the smaller eye wall, which means that a downtick in intensity may not be as large as normal.
Oh God.
That's totally crazy.
That's no.
Bad news.
God damn it.
I'm noticing it, Language. I'm noticing it too as well on the radar. It seems to be expanding a little bit, but definitely winds up to Category 5 range. Of course, it's way far out in the radar view, so kind of take these with a big grain of salt. But Category 5 force when still being seen by the radar and velocities,
To be
far
fair,
end velocities.
this is not a normal storm at all. Like I said earlier today, this is a once in a blue moon storm. I don't think anything like this is gonna happen. This is gonna be the only time like something like this happens. Probably within the next decade. Hopefully, I'm right.
I mean, the alarming thing to note, though, is that storms of this intensity and such are potentially becoming increasingly more common. You know, we said, there's only been 4 CDPS or 4 stage 10 CDPS numbers ever recorded in the Atlantic, and at least from satellite era and just data that we have, out of those 4, 3 have been within the last 14 years, and 2 of them have been within the past 3 years. Now, that's either an anomaly, or we're starting to see a trend of continually more intense systems, because the more recent years we've seen numerous very high ones pop up as well. Irma, Maria, Michael as well. So for future trends, we also have to be very concerned with what we're seeing as well.
Well, I'd have to say that 4 data points are not enough to create.
Oh, totally. That's why I said it's not definitive at this point in time or anything. But watching a trend like that continue.
Also, that we do have a lot of times storms get up, at least around the world, to that 185 mile per hour, 180 mile per hour wind speed. I think that we get those more commonly than people would think just around the world. But I would say in the Atlantic Basin, in the past few years, we have had more Category 5s than in years past. But before that, we had a relatively active period as well. So I don't think there are many trends that can be established now, but we'll have to see in the future. I just don't think there's been enough time that's passed.
Yeah, because I was looking at that earlier actually. In 2000, there was a similar trend. Obviously, 2005 there was like 4 of them, 4 Category 5s.
Yep.
And sorry about that. Call.
I think he's lost his train of thought. Okay,
Sorry.
then. Well,
Wait, no, hold up.
okay.
Sorry about that. I didn't
Quickly.
lose my train of thought. So, anyways, what was I saying?
Category
the
5.
Category 5s between 2003 is more than the amount that's right now.
Okay.
I mean,
well,
we
that
can't
was
say
very.
for certain. I mean, what we can't say for certain is that Dorian is an extremely dangerous storm, life-threatening to people that are in harm's way in Grand Bahama right now and in Freeport, potentially already deadly in Apico, and even potentially already in Grand Bahama, and has definitely caused unfathomable damage in Apico from some of the potential videos that we've seen come out so far, and that this thing is far from over. Freeport is riding guns way right now, 6 miles an hour coming across almost due west to make almost a direct eye pass over Freeport. And then we have to be worried about the rest of the United States as well, because this system could be getting larger in size so that eye wall replacement cycle finishes up and intensity manages to maintain itself somehow. We're hoping for a weakening to happen faster than forecast, and we're really hoping for this thing to stay further offshore. But we're just really not liking the trends right now. We're hoping that everyone that's potentially in harm's way is monitoring the storm as closely as they can. It's imperative that those in harm's way pay very close attention. Keep in mind every update that you can find. Listen to local officials for any information, and stay as safe as possible.
Well, we're finishing up the coverage here at this point, at least our commentary. We will be leaving the graphics and the images up on the screen all night long until tomorrow morning. If you're familiar with our schedule by now, you'll know what I'll say next. Tim, a part of the US team, he, I believe, is going to be doing a update on the Force 13 channel with this new information very shortly. You can find that on our channel page on YouTube. And tomorrow we'll have more updates at 9 a.m. Eastern time. We'll see what the situation is, whether we're going to go live with a discussion later on in the morning. But if not, we'll have another update after that at 3 p.m. Eastern time with more discussion at 5 p.m. I think that's pretty much how it's going to work. In the meantime, you know, I think it's very good that the community engagement and people helping each other out in the comments section happens quite often. So that's why we leave, also another reason why we leave the stream on overnight, so that people can chat with each other in the chat section about all kinds of things to do with the storm. Because it is getting ever closer to Florida, tropical storm force winds will happen probably over the course of tomorrow, I should imagine. And hurricane force conditions are definitely possible along the Florida coast as it draws ever nearer. It still isn't turning north. We are still watching, and that moment when it starts, we'll let you know. But at the minute, it ain't happening. This was Force 13's live coverage. We'll return you now to the visual images there, and we'll be back with you in the morning. Thanks to the team for their input tonight, and good night.